What a pleasure it is for me to be in my hometown of Seattle. I'm in the other Washington now, and I'm not responsible for any of the dysfunction. I am grateful to have a chance to talk about these reluctant stayers. I didn't see any hands that didn't go up, someone who'd sort of already quit on the job. And as was mentioned, I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to understand why people stay and why people quit. But it's just been recently that I've turned attention to what are the consequences of these people who are staying around but mentally have already checked out. So what I'd like to do is review very quickly some core theories of turnover, a couple of which I don't think will be familiar, I think will be new, so there'll be something for you to take away. So we can talk about costs associated with turnover, recruitment, selection, and training. Those are obvious, and they hit the P&L. But some of the more insidious costs are actually the loss of knowledge, the slowed production, the decreased customer or client service, and the drain on leadership. In other words, if your top performers are being pulled out to other opportunities and you're pushing systematically your poorest performers out, who's left to lead the company in the future? Right? So thinking about that loss of talent, I think, is critical. So as a new doctoral student here at the University of Washington, just 4 miles north of us, I came in interested in looking at turnover, working with the two top guys on the planet on the topic, Terry Mitchell and Tom Lee. And they said, Brooks, it's really about satisfaction, commitment, and engagement. I said, super, I'm interested. But as I dug into the literature, it was all focused on predicting who leaves. So one day I pedaled down from Ravenna down to the campus and got there and said, you know, I've been thinking, if we care about keeping good employees, why is it that we focus on predicting who's going to quit? And sort of the quick reaction was, well, it's the opposite side of the same coin, Brooks, so, let's move on. I said, well, with all due respect, I think it might be something else. And they said, knock yourself out, all right? So we took the old theories, and I developed in my dissertation a new theory. And the theory of staying is job embeddedness. You probably recognize the idea of selecting for a person's fit with the organization as something that's been around for a long time. We talked about links in the organization, things like mentors or being a part of a team where you feel like you're winning, or unique sacrifices, whether that's unvested stock options or benefits or perks that you couldn't get somewhere else. That's all pretty familiar to us. The HR professionals in this room are sort of, yeah, okay, nothing new. When you get to the next column, though, the degree to which a person fits with the community becomes important. Now, I live in Washington, D.C. metro region, but if you come to campus and you ask a professor, do you live in Maryland or Virginia, historically that has been very important because Maryland leans left and Virginia historically has leaned right. And so you don't have to say, what tribe do you belong to? You just say, where do you live? And then you know, all right? So this idea of fitting with the community, it's not just the values, but also the physical amenities. When I was at UW, we called it the Rainier effect. Our MBAs wanted to be within visual sight of Rainier on those 8 days when you can see it, right? And so do I fit with the broader community? And then do I have links in the community? Do I have meaningful organizational affiliations? Do I like my church? Am I involved in the schools? What about friends? Is this a place where I've made some good friends? And then are there sacrifices? Now, I'm not just talking about is your house underwater, right? 2009, 2010, I can't sell the thing. But if I left here, would it be difficult? Would I be leaving something that would be hard to replicate? So the addition of the community dimension now to what were historically organizational factors was meaningful. What do you mean meaningful? When I say meaningful, I mean it was statistically significant in terms of predicting who stayed in an organization and who left. The early theory was all focused, so these 6 dimensions, predicting embeddedness and then employee retention. Further research refined this, and we found stronger results on the organizational factors contributing to what we called embeddedness in the organization, with direct links to job performance and what are known as organizational citizenship behaviors. That's the above and beyond the call of duty, the things that are not recognized in a performance appraisal, but make the place better. When we looked at the community dimensions, and we called now the half of the construct embeddedness of the community, that was the best predictor of employee retention and absenteeism after we controlled for job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and employee engagement. Right? So the point of this slide is really for you to understand that those organizational factors are important, but attending to community factors also improves prediction of who stays and leaves. So this is not a talk about embeddedness. I could do an hour and a half easily on that. I know that you have planes to catch and other plans. But let me take you now to more recent research that looks at job satisfaction trajectories, meaning people live their life going forward. So historically, organizations, if we talk a 30-year window, and that some of you will have careers that sort of span back to those early days, you do an employee survey annually, and you take their level of satisfaction, and you look at who stays and who leaves, and you try to predict that using that static value, that one-time measurement, maybe in January or December, whenever you did your employee engagement. Well, as the technology has evolved, it became clear to me that we have now with something like TINYpulse, the ability to look at where are the trends going, right? So are they trending up on satisfaction? Are they trending down? And would that help predict turnover? So in looking at job satisfaction as a predictor, we found in a study that I'll present in just a second, we found that it was not the average levels of satisfaction that predicted turnover. It was actually the trajectory. Because people live their life going forward. They're thinking about the future. And even if things were relatively low in terms of satisfaction in the past, if they see a positive trajectory, they're more likely to believe in a positive future. And so this research, I can kind of capture the insights first saying unit level, and your individual trajectory is not the only thing that matters. How your group, so your department or team feels, also has an influence on turnover. In the interest of time, let me get to, in 2013, it won the Human Resources Division of the Academy of Management. That's where professors of management go to talk to each other and not talk to you. I apologize. We're trying to remedy that. But it won the best paper published in internet anywhere in 2013 in human resources. But most of you don't know about that because we've not done a great job communicating with you. So I'm thankful very much, David, for the invitation to come today. But I want to take it one step further to help resolve the question or the issues that Dave teed up earlier, and couple this now with what's known as proximal withdrawal states theory, meaning that some people start to check out before they actually stop taking the paycheck. So think with me about enthusiastic stayers, enthusiastic leavers, or reluctant stayers and reluctant leavers. How do you feel about the enthusiastic stayers? This is good news. You love them and you don't have enough of them. How do you feel about people who want to leave and do leave? Well, now, this is a little bit tricky, right? So there's dysfunctional turnover, a good person leaves, and there's functional turnover. That's when a bad person leaves, and we kind of quietly clap after the door closes, right? This idea of enthusiastic leavers, if they really want to go at some point, that's great. We hope that you will be a proud alum. We hope that you will speak well of us in the future. We hope you'll send good people our way, but you want to sort of send them off with a positive experience and recognize and appreciate their contributions. Now when you get someone who's a reluctant leaver, someone who is leaving the organization but reluctantly, This happens relatively rarely, and probably the place I saw this most is doing work with the Navy Federal Credit Union. They're based in Northern Virginia, and as the name suggests, they serve our Navy service families. In that particular organization, we saw a lot of women working in administrative roles who were trailing spouses. So they were working in the DC region because their husband was posted in the Pentagon, and then he got deployed in Guam or somewhere else, and they followed. So they were pleased to be a part of the organization, but if there wasn't a role for them in this new duty station, they were reluctant leavers. They didn't want to leave the firm, but they did. So this, for the most part, is not under your control. These are circumstances that sort of happened to your employees, and so I would encourage you not to lose too many tears, cry too many tears over this. It's relatively low percentage of people and not particularly controllable. But the quadrant where I want to spend the rest of the time allocated to me is around reluctant stayers. These are the people who don't leave for whatever reason, but may or may not be performing at a high level. So how do you classify this? This is now sort of getting into the analytics. I want to suggest to you how I have actually done this in a paper that's under review to be published in Top Journal in Management. So the first is to look at actual behavior. Did they stay or did they leave? That's obvious. The next is in classifying enthusiastic or reluctant leavers. We had a 5-point scale on intention to leave. If it was higher than a 3, we said they were enthusiastic. If they were lower than a 3, they were reluctant. So it's a fairly simple split. Sometimes you would use what's known as a median split, but in this case I thought it would be most sort of face valid, because 3 is the neutral point here. Those who said, yeah, I want to leave, I'm enthusiastic. Those who say no, then they're reluctant. And then I wanted to predict before they left, in other words, while they were still there, who were these reluctant stayers? So I used sort of the normal or usual suspects: job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and then job embeddedness. But not just the final or static value. I looked at the change trajectory or slope. And now you can sort of see the connection to Tiny Pulse, right? You have this ability to pulse and see what the trends are. Do you have priors? What do you think's predicting? Can you see what's kind of the results that are coming? Well, first let me tell you that working across 2 organizations, we found 38% were enthusiastic stayers and 42% were reluctant stayers. Do you think that's good news? I did a sort of a double take on that. I said, wow, I have read the Gallup stuff and sort of been skeptical when they say 68% of American workers are disengaged. And then and I'm not a shill for Gallup. They're down the street. They've been in to talk to my classes. But that number, I'd always been skeptical. I'll be honest with you. I'd always sort of questioned that number. But that's what came up in my own research to major organizations. Enthusiastic leavers, 16%, and reluctant leavers, 4%. So the key findings in terms of thinking about enthusiastic stayers, they were characterized by high levels of embeddedness and high levels of satisfaction. Reluctant stayers were categorized by low levels of embeddedness and low levels of satisfaction. So this now becomes something that's potentially actionable for you. And the very best predictor at sorting out the enthusiastic from reluctant stayers was the final level of embeddedness, but the slope of satisfaction. In part, I believe that that is the case because embeddedness does not vary as much as satisfaction. Satisfaction sort of ebbs and flows, but how connected a person is to the community is less likely to vary with time. If we look at enthusiastic leaders, they were those who perceived the most external opportunities for them. In other words, people who think they have opportunities will be more enthusiastic about finding and joining those new opportunities. And the reluctant leavers, because there were so few, there's low predictive power and we weren't able to discern specific patterns. But I've suggested, I think, that it's based on other research that we've done, most likely uncontrollable turnover. So the best predictor here, now thinking about enthusiastic leavers, was the slope of embeddedness and the slope of satisfaction. Again, getting at dynamic, the value of dynamic measurement. So my question to you is, and I know it's against the rules, but I'm the last speaker, so you know what, the heck. What does this mean? Or maybe you can, Slido and Dave gives me this. What does this mean? What should we be doing? How should we be thinking differently? Ooh, those norms are very strongly in place. No one is going to ask that question. Well, so is there value in measuring or assessing the most recent TINYpulse or other survey data point? You bet. Is there value in assessing trends? You can just raise your hand. Yeah, there's value in assessing these trends. And one of the things I love is the ability, if you've got dynamic measurement, to associate specific trends with specific events. In other words, and you've seen evidence this in prior presentations, a change curve, and you can see as the organization works through change, we can predict lower levels of satisfaction or commitment, and then hopefully if the change is successful, we should come out of that with higher levels of satisfaction and commitment. What about lawsuits? How do lawsuits affect your employees? If you're in an organization, it's the subject of some sort of complaint, very visible or public complaint, perhaps you could look at the day that that was filed and what was its impact on our employee satisfaction. The day that raises are announced, right? Promotions, bonuses, etc. Can we track and assess that? Maybe this is a good point for me to share with you just one of the pieces of data from the gravity research. How many of you think, now you have to remember that, so for those of you who are not familiar with the gravity example, Dan Price, the CEO, had an epiphany and decided he was going to raise all of his lower paid employees up to $70,000 a year. This is a company that processes credit cards. They had some employees who were over 70 at the point that amount was made, and some that were below 70. Those who were above 70, how do you think they responded from a satisfaction perspective after this announcement? People with less skill and less years of experience were now going to be paid as much as they were, and their raises were going to be relatively modest. Did that raise or lower their satisfaction? Yeah, interestingly, most of you are predicting this, right? You might think, well, you know, if we are all just sort of hopeful people and want the best for everyone, then they'd be happy too. But that's not really how social psychologists have explained our world to us. Turns out that comparison is a pervasive phenomenon, and when we perceive unfairness, even monkeys react to that, right? Some of you have seen the viral video with the monkeys that one's given cucumber and one's giving the grape, right? And the one who gets the cucumber first eats the cucumber happily, and then the partner gets a grape, and then the grape one eats it happily, and then the next time the first rabbit or the first monkey gets the cucumber, what does he do? He throws it back at the researcher. Take your darn cucumber, all right? I want the grape. Now, so based on that video, based on what we know about equity theory, we would predict that people who are higher paid, seeing their peers, even if they're happy for them at some level, experienced a dip in satisfaction. And that's in fact what we found in looking at that research. We also found that the people who got the raise, satisfaction went up. My question is, how long did it remain high? What do you know about the hedonic treadmill? A regression to the mean. So it went up for a time, and it looked like it was between 3 and 4 months before it was back to what some people will call the set point for satisfaction. Meaning they were happy for a time, but then it became the new normal. That's what I get paid. All right. One of the things that's most interesting, though, is that they have not left. Who, with a skill set and experience, is making 35, gets raised up to 70, is going to be able to find a great job outside, right? So their job alternatives may be limited. And that takes me back to the earlier story, right, that I'm telling here. What are the consequences of reluctant staying? Well, the two organizations that I was working with on this prior research, an important part of their ability to remain in business is predicated on fundraising, right? So these are nonprofits, but they're large, major nonprofits. Their top fundraiser in the year of this study brought in $10 million. Their bottom fundraiser, $30,000. Their average fundraiser brought in $2.5 million. Do you think there was a difference between enthusiastic and reluctant stayers? Yes, it was $1.3 million. Put differently, enthusiastic stayers brought in a little more than $3 million a year, and the reluctant stayers, on average, brought in less than $2 million a year. Is there a bottom line impact to keeping reluctant stayers? That's really the bottom line for me. We look at turnover, you got functional, dysfunctional turnover, but what about staying? We might have functional and dysfunctional staying. And how can we identify that better, more proactively in the future? And I'm pleased, and I have no stock options at TINYpulse. I am just here to say I find it useful as a researcher to be able to see now the trends as well as the static point, and can see multiple applications for better understanding and predicting who's going to be a top performer in the future and who's going to be a less productive employee. I thank you and welcome whatever questions you have.
So one of the questions that came up was, how did you do this research? Did companies give you data? Did you do it through surveys? How did you get to this?
Super, right. So in doing academic research on turnover, it's critical for you to develop a partnership with an external partner. And so the organizations that I've partnered with, we have a deal whereby I collect data, and so the development of the survey is my responsibility. Then we work with a provider to collect that data. I can do it in Qualtrics on my own platform, or we can use TINYpulse or your platform. But we then will collect this data. The one critical difference for me is that I have to know who submitted the data, right? So it cannot be anonymous. It will be confidential because I get the data directly and the organization does not. I'm the only one who ever knows the identity. But after a 6-month or 12-month or 18-month period, you provide me a list of who stayed and who left, and I can relate that now back to their satisfaction, commitment, or embeddedness. And so that's one of the fundamentals, is I have to actually know the identity. But for everyone else, it is truly confidential.
Okay. For the sake of time, I'm going to ask one more question, and then for those of you that would like to continue the conversation, it'd be great if you could stick around for just a few moments, because there's a few questions that I think people would like to get to. But for the rest of for the entire room here that are using TINYpulse, what are some of the questions that you would ask if we were trying to create a custom question to measure embeddedness?
Yeah, thank you. So there are 2 scales out there. There's one that I developed that looks at very specific things that I discussed in the 6 quadrants, right? So do you fit in the community? Do you feel like you have links in the community? For example, are you involved, for example, churches, schools, clubs? Would it be difficult for you to leave this community? For example, you love your neighborhood or your home, or your families and friends live nearby. On the fit in the organization side, to what degree do you feel like you fit in the organization? For example, the values or the culture. Links in the organization, to what degree? And if you just Google Brooks Holtom job embeddedness, my research will come up. Actually, if you do scholar.google.com, that's the best place, and you can get actually PDF copies of all of these articles. If not, you can send me an email. I'm happy to share them. But these items are actually in these academic papers in the appendix. Links organization, do you have a mentor? Or are you a part of a team that's meaningful, sacrificing the organization? Are there benefits or perks that are hard for you to find somewhere else? Would it be hard for you to leave this organization? So very quickly, those are the 6 dimensions that I would push on.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, thank you.
All right.